Welcome to the Enterprise GTM podcast, hosted by Tim Zonka and Vidya Raman. Each episode takes a deep dive into how to successfully maneuver the unique dynamics of enterprise go-to-market while candidly discussing successful approaches, pitfalls, and failures alike. Our guests are seasoned company founders, GTM execs, technology buyers, and end users. Please note that the views expressed by individuals in these podcasts are not to be treated as investment advice. They are also not representing the views of their employers, current or previous.
All right, welcome to yet another episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Today we have Jerry Ting, who is the CEO of Evisort. And Evisort is on a mission to change how companies interact with their most important business documents. Prior to founding Evisort, Jerry went to law school and has a law degree from Harvard Law School, no less. Welcome, Jerry. We are super excited to have you here today with us.
Thank you, Vidya. Thanks, Tim. Excited to be on.
All right, Jerry, let's begin at the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about your life story and what actually led you after law school to pursue entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I was born and raised in the Bay Area, and so always grew up, looking up to the technology leaders and entrepreneurs that made Silicon Valley. And before going to law school, I was actually doing a lot of different jobs, including some stints in marketing and public relations, but also doing an account executive role at Yelp after their IPO. And so cut my teeth and go to market, and then went to law school where I thought I wanted to be a practicing lawyer, but quickly realized that, I like getting deals done and pushing sort of the business components of deal making versus the legal components of deal making. And that actually really lined up well. This was, 2016, 2017 timeframe, because at the time AI was still very new. And we saw a great opportunity, my co-founders and I saw a great opportunity to use AI to help with not just contracts, but all the key business documents that surround a deal. And so that's actually, personal pain of being in law school and not wanting to be a lawyer, and then seeing a great opportunity to use technology to solve some of the problems that if I were a practitioner, whether it was in rev ops or sales ops or marketing operations, legal, procurement, finance, et cetera, everybody has a document. And so we thought this is such a great opportunity to take the opportunity and actually marry it with AI technology at the time.
Wow, that's a fascinating story. I never heard anyone have this kind of a trajectory before. Just curious about one thing. So if I understand the trajectory of your career, Jerry, it sounds like you did sales jobs at places like Yelp, which I'm sure would have been very, very demanding and different from any regular tech job. and then from there, you went to law school. Could you help us understand what led you to law school after a stint in sales?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was in PR and marketing before going to Yelp, right? And I was working in Los Angeles as a journalist, freelance journalist at times, but also affiliated at times. And, did photography for the USC football team as they were on the field, because I went to USC and that's where I did journalism. And so I had all this background around marketing and PR specifically. But for me, I wanted to get closer to revenue. And for me, the question was, how do I get as close to revenue as possible? And as a young person, I just thought everything in life afterwards is going to be better if you know how to sell and if you know how to convince people to follow your values and ideas and visions. And so I went and proactively seeked out a sales job. And it was funny because I actually had the credentials to go to Harvard Law School right upon graduation, but I decided not to do that. I wanted to go and do the sales job and learn really one of the most important and most difficult skill sets. And then went back to my path with law school. So sales for me was a specific thing that I wanted to learn. And I'm so very glad I did that. It's one of the best experiences that I've had in my life.
Wow, that's again very interesting. I think only a lawyer, or at least a former one, will think so strategically about sales before entrepreneurship. That's fascinating. So let's actually, for this next section, Jerry, let's go back to the early days of Evisort. I still remember when I first met you like 6+ years ago, I was a little taken aback seeing such a young, you still look young, but you were way younger when we met 6+ years ago, looked like a kid right out of college, frankly. And this was obviously well before the ChatGPT era. And you were selling to legal teams at very, very large enterprises, and that to an AI enabled product. It's kind of mind blowing, the combination of selling AI to large enterprises and that too within legal teams. It's like, sounds like the worst possible nightmare for many founders. Tell us a little bit about how you overcame initial skepticism, objections, all of those brick walls that I'm assuming you had to run through.
Yeah, it was very difficult exactly for the reasons you detailed. And I would even say our first round of funding video, even before you and I met, it was hard to get that first round of funding because what they will say is, large enterprises are conservative, right? Both from a security perspective, but change management perspective. And then you overlay that difficulty with working in regulated industries with organizations like legal, but also with procurement, with IT, with HR counterparts, finance counterparts. These are all the knowledge workers that are also conservative in some ways in how they buy and adopt technology. So it was really hard. It was really hard. Even our first round of funding, our investors that we were going out to said, we don't know if ever in our lifetime these kind of knowledge workers would adopt AI. It's funny to say that in 2024, where we're sitting right now, because that's one of the great axes of growth and one of the great axes of opportunity for enterprise software. But back then, it was actually funds had turned us away after the first meeting, actually saying, wow, this is never going to happen. The story proved to be in our favor as the overall environment changed. To go back to your question, though, of how did we do that? We really early on took a product-led approach in our enterprise selling motion. And what I mean by that is we would walk into a Fortune 100 company. And maybe because we were young and crazy, we thought, why not? Right? Like, let's just go to the biggest companies on earth. And that's what we did. And they wouldn't believe us. They wouldn't believe that the AI would be accurate enough. They wouldn't believe that the AI could be detailed enough in terms of what they're looking to solve. And so for us, what we did to get over that initial scrutiny is we proved it to them. And we literally would just take a document in the meeting and do live demos. We would just upload it in the conference room.
Wow.
And in 6 seconds, you'll get the answer, right? Too fast for anybody to make it up. And I think that's what I mean by infusing a PLG-like motion in an enterprise buying cycle, is that you can actually build great competitive advantages by doing that. And that's really been a key to our success as a company.
And so, Jerry, what about, I love those early days of we would just walk into these places. I'd love to hear in those early days, any customers that you walked away from?
There were certain large enterprises that, and my advice to the founders listening out there is that sometimes it's a curse to actually get big enterprise companies in the beginning. Without naming names, there was one large, top, I think 20 company in the world who said, we would love to use you and do a 7-figure deal at Series A, which was a big deal for us at the time. But you have to come on premise because our data is so secure. And, we're on the journey to the cloud. And this was 2019. And we said, what? How's that possible? Right? And so, we're not going to be able to deploy our proprietary algorithms on premise because these are our crown jewels. And by the way, everybody's going to SaaS. And so, there were things like that, Tim, where the pressures of hitting numbers and going to board meetings and trying to do the next round, the commercial pressures were there. But I think we at Evisort stay very disciplined around, hey, this is our core asset. Yeah. And, we can't just sacrifice our company's roadmap or incur a bunch of technical debt because we want to get a deal done. And I think looking backwards now, it's been several years, I'm so glad we didn't do those deals.
Good for you. I think it's so, you get some of these, especially early days. And like you're saying, you got, pressure of board meetings and just wanting to see the up into the right charts that you always have in mind as you're starting a company, and have those big checks kind of waved in front of you. It's super alluring, but it sounds like you made the right call in that example. And it's good for you. It's tough to stick to your guns in those cases. What about as you then, when it wasn't just you anymore, or you and your co-founders kind of selling in some of the early deals? Tell us about the experience of the first sales hire. What'd you look for? What went right? What went wrong?
The first sales hire was not a sales hire. And I think that's the sort of riddle that I think a lot of founders that I speak with, and I'm an angel investor and an advisor to different companies. So just looking across not just Evisort, but 20 plus companies that I work with, the best sellers in the early days, when you don't have a playbook, you don't have a defined brand, you don't have defined pricing and packaging, you're still finding early product market fit, usually is not a salesperson. It's usually somebody who's very passionate about the product. And in our case, it was somebody that I went to grad school with who could speak the language of our ICP in our ideal customer profile and was just very passionate. And, he just, when he heard no from a customer or a prospect, he'll figure out how do we get to yes. And it's not somebody who's coming in and following a defined medic-based playbook.
Mm-hmm.
It was more of an entrepreneurial personality. And his name is Mei. He's still with me today, and he leads our community strategy today. But even now, if you walk into our first 20 customers, they think Mei is Evisort. Like it was
That's
level
awesome.
of white glove care.
At what point did things shift and you realized, it made sense to bring in, I don't know what the right phrase is, but like a more of a enterprise sales rep sort of persona?
I would say your first couple of reps, like AE background reps, need to have worked in a startup before, selling a similar sized deal with a similar sales motion.
Yeah.
I really don't think it works for somebody to say, I sold SMB, so let me come sell enterprise. I just haven't seen it, at least. And so, Tim, to go to your question of when did we hire that, when's the right time to hire that? I think it's after you had a small set of initial customers. So for us, it was, a couple dozen customers where they were using the product in the same way, right? When we do discovery calls and first calls, they were seeing the same problems. When we did the demos, they said, okay, that set of features meets our pains. Like it started to get a little bit more repeatable. I don't want to say it's completely repeatable, but we felt like as a founding team, if we went and hired a classic sales profile, we could give them enough pipeline and enough understanding of how the product works. And with a lot of elbow grease, they could be successful. And for us, that was a couple dozen early customers.
Can you talk a little bit more? You mentioned hiring that first wave of more like classic AEs, if you will, that you don't want to hire someone who's sold in the enterprise if you're selling SMB or vice versa. But what's your experience around, that they've been in startups as well, or at least some close enough? Sorry, it's a biased question, but I found it's got to actually be really close. Like hiring someone, even if they were at a startup and they came in when there was, 150 people, it's like night and day different from when it's 15 people. But what's your take there?
Yeah, I think I agree with that, but it becomes hard to find those people.
Yeah.
Because if somebody was a first AE at a 15-person company and they went on to, do many follow rounds and now they're like an RVP of sales, it's hard for them to come back and carry a bag.
Yeah.
And so, Tim, I think it is a difficult one to get right. But I would say it's also something you have to use proxies for, right? Like has somebody gone from big firm to small firm to big firm and found success in more than one company? For me, what I've seen hiring of AEs go wrong is if somebody was really successful at one company when they were small and then rode it out for 6 years and now they're a unicorn and they say, we want to do it again and I want to be the VP of sales. That person is going to be shocked that you don't have RevOps in place.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. What about hiring like early marketing people? What was that like and how did you prosecute that part of the journey?
Yeah, it's funny. Really up until we passed 10 million of ARR, I thought marketing was demand gen. I literally just thought that's what it was because I've worked with marketers in the past that were from a product marketing or corporate or brand marketing perspective, but I never thought like that was for me at the early stage because we're owning the revenue number, right? You're doing the triple, double game, and every other dollar you have, you're putting the product and engineering. And so from a marketing perspective, getting the very basics of brand done, okay, website, a logo, some branding, messaging statements, okay, that needs to be done, whether in-house with agencies. But for me, marketing up until really, I would say 10 million of AR is demand gen. And, way past that, to be honest. If you get a marketer who's talking about the first thing is doing a rebrand, you're talking to the wrong person.
Yeah. Yep, that makes sense. What about early days of pricing? You had mentioned something just a little bit ago, or like, we don't even have established like packaging or pricing. So talk about like how you initially priced your product. How did that evolve? What'd you base it on? Was it the money to be had and the established budgets? Like, I'd love to hear your experience there.
Yeah, that's something that I think we also innovated on is because we were an AI company, we wanted to price closer to value than just on a per seat model. And this was really early to do this, right? This is like circa 2017, 2018. And we didn't want to do like a monthly consumption model as well, because we wanted to do enterprise deals, with ARR. And Tim, as I tell the story now, it sounds, well thought out. At the time, we're just like trying to figure it out. We're like, we didn't know the word enterprise. So I don't want to alienate any founders that's listening. We did not know any of this at the time we're going through it. And so for us, though, we realized, like, if you were to use us on a small non-disclosure agreement, and you were to do a lot of those, right, you're getting a little bit less value than if you were to use us on your large, complicated enterprise statements of work and pricing documents. And so, like, how do we tie closer to the value? And so for us, we try to innovate closer to the value that we're giving the customers and less following the per seat model, which I think takes a little bit of getting used to for the market. But for us in our industry, we set the model here, and a lot of our competitors have actually followed, especially as generative AI becomes more prevalent.
As you were like attributing some kind of value to those early deals, it seems like ChatGPT would have made things so much like like there's language now, there's interest, there's like frankly like board level interest. You preceded a lot of that, like you skinned your knees before you had any sort of help from something like that. So talk about in those early days, like how did you approach this kind of novel approach to a problem and crack the problem of being like this departmental solution to now an enterprise wide one before it was a board level conversation?
It was really around making the lives of our users and their managers easier. And I think that product focused land and expand model allowed us to be successful relative to the stage of the company that we were at, because we were solving smaller problems to start. And then once you land and then you expand and then you become an enterprise-wide solution, that's when you get a lot of the enterprise quote unquote requirements that sometimes I see startups that I advise get stuck on. You can get the big logos without having to do all of the API requirements and access control and security if you just do a line of business sale and then use that line of business group of customers as design partners to then build a journey of enterprise readiness.
I just want to pause for a moment, especially for the listeners. It's so easy to kind of like miss, I think, the import of what you just said, because everyone, tosses, I don't know how many times a day so many of us say the words land and expand. But that really seemed to be the approach, like land departmentally and then expand, pre-Chat GPT being a big enterprise thing, like expand toward the broader enterprise. Talk about like how deliberate was that expand motion, like after you had that land, or was it relatively organic?
It was relatively organic, but we did it really well. And it was because we didn't have customer success at the time. And so, Tim, I would sell a deal and I would go deliver the deal, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're playing the outbound product marketer and product management hat as well, right? But if you land, let's say Coca-Cola as an example, you walk in, the first couple of weeks you're working at Coca-Cola, you're going to learn a whole lot of things that your product doesn't do that you didn't even think about doing. And so if you really focus around the customer from a 360 company perspective, how you sell, how you support, how do you build your product, over time, they become a great sounding board for the company strategy. Mm-hmm. So for us, we didn't do enterprise deals when we were a small company because we also never got invited to the RFPs, right? They didn't know who the heck these guys are. And so all we could do was get into the BUs. And so it was a happy mistake, I guess, to be honest, but it kind of insulated us in the first couple of quarters from having to do the big CIO deployments. So when we went to finally do those big CIO deployments, and we were looking at our first set of enterprise customers and going to expand to other adjacencies around our buying centers, we had a bit more time because we're already onboarded. And then now you're doing an enterprise readiness roadmap. But it was really because we landed at the BU, kind of got incubated, cut our teeth, and then moved our way up.
Jerry, for the benefit of our founders, I just wanted to quickly paraphrase a couple of very important takeaways from the last few minutes. So one thing that you just now said was about the 360-degree support. Having worked at both startups and mid-sized enterprises, I feel like this is one that works really, really well for startups. Whereas for the larger enterprises, there tend to be more handoffs as a customer progresses through different parts of like the adoption life cycle. And for startups who prize proximity to customers, this can really, really work in their favor. And the second thing I wanted to emphasize, like Tim just did, is how you think about land and expand, and how, you use the term treat your departmental lands almost as your design partners. And I love that, because I think a lot of startups think that, oh, we are not yet enterprise ready, and we have to build all these other features. But it doesn't have to be that in order for you to have an initial land. So I love how timeline wise you can actually stage this rather than try and do that CIO sale, like you said, trying to chew off too much right at the get go. So I love how you put that.
Yeah, I think the CIO sale is really difficult because they're used to being called on by the Microsofts, the Oracles, the SAPs of the world. And so when you get in that room too early, you're going to look like an intern. Like, when I've worked on and with enterprise teams, they'll bring 10 people in an executive briefing center with 2 field engineers, a value engineer, the AE, and an executive sponsor. Like, you're not going to compete with that. And if you got into the wrong room too quickly, which we did a couple of times, they're going to wonder what's wrong with this company. Like, it just, how is the CEO sitting here for 5 hours, right? So there's also just like a reality component. Yeah.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, so moving on. This is great, by the way. Thank you for sharing some of the history of how Evisort has come to be where it is today. So shifting to the here and now, Jerry. So we are at a very interesting time in as far as enterprise adoption is in AI is concerned. Like you were telling us before, it seems like enterprises just want more and more AI and ideally more Gen AI. But from your vantage point, are you still seeing any challenges that prevent even broader or perhaps even faster adoption of AI-enabled products within enterprises?
Yeah, I think large enterprise software companies really struggle to put generative AI into their platforms. And I think part of it is because, they're so rich in feature sets already that to make any change is difficult to do. And so I would say the innovation that has to happen over the next couple of years will be done, I think, by startups. And then startups will partner with large organizations, and large organizations can learn from the startups and vice versa. And how do you actually infuse generative AI in real business processes? Like, everybody has a chatbot now, right? Like, every organization out there, if you look at public websites, they have that. Okay, that's Gen AI 1.0. Like, how do you actually build really, really mission critical use cases in the enterprise with software that's been around for 20 years and infuse AI into that? I think it's going to take some time. And I think that's where, if you look at, some of the areas where we get most excited, we day one can take a document and make it work and make it effective. And so how do you overlay that on other enterprise systems? I think that 1 + 1 is equal to 3 kind of scenario is really exciting to us here at Evisort. But I think for large companies to do it in a vacuum, it's going to be a different kind of DNA. And so I do think as we go forward, large companies and startups working together is going to be more prevalent. And I think that's good for the overall ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like while chatbots, AI-enabled chatbots in particular, becoming ubiquitous, in one way it's a positive because people are getting more comfortable with the idea of co-pilots and so on. But at the same time, not realizing the fact that in order to make your existing software work seamlessly with those chatbots or other kinds of AI functionality, you can't take that for granted. And it seems like that is something that big enterprises are either wrestling with or will have to come to terms with sooner than later.
Yeah, and I think a lot of large enterprises are well underway on that journey, right? But it's hard, right? Like it's just, when the internet first came out and SaaS became a thing, the journey to cloud took 10 to 15 years, right? So I think
and we're still not done.
We're still not done. I had this company ask me to go on premise. I was like, no, we're not. And so, it's going to take time, right? And I just think that we're at the beginning of something really exciting. But I think the excitement now has passed a little bit, and we're entering the phase of how do we actually tie this into an ROI calculation, a value case that could be justified to the CIO. And I think that's the next leg of our journey.
Absolutely. So from the vantage point of founders that are just starting out today, Jerry, and that are leveraging off-the-shelf AI models, maybe tools and other frameworks, how do you think they should be thinking about building technology moats?
Yeah, I think there's probably three key parts to building moats. It's the specialization of the technology to the problem that's being solved. It's the access to training data that could then be used to actually make the technology, whether it's an LLM model or other models, accurate to the problem that you're solving. And I think the third one that I don't think people talk enough about is you also have to build this all into a user interface. And
Mhm.
a AI-based user interface feels different, is designed different. The user journey is completely different than a software-based user interface only, right? In the SaaS world. And I think that's where startups have a great advantage is that they can design the entire end user experience from the ground up with an AI first mindset. And I think to tie it back to Evisort, we had that advantage. Tim, you asked me earlier, you guys kind of predated ChatGPT. And so, what was that world like? But we were using deep learning models and really advanced technologies even before GPT, and we adopted LLMs as a part of a broader suite when LLMs became popular. But our user interface has always been designed for an automation based world where AI does part of the reasoning. And so I think people don't talk enough. I think that the first 2 points people talk a lot about, but people don't talk enough about the software layer that needs to be AI first. And the analogy that I think I'll give is, when Tesla was designed, Tesla always knew that they're going to have autopilot even before the technology was there, but they installed sensors well before autopilot was rolled out. And even before full self-driving was rolled out recently to broader audiences, they had technologies and computing ready for that. So you need to know where you're going and then design around that.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Those are great points about how founders can think about moats. And especially, like you said, the third point about user experience, it's not talked about that much, but definitely like in previous era of software, that still trumps any just hardcore backend technical advantage that companies can deliver, especially in vertical SaaS. That brings me to my next question, Jerry, which is on a related note. For founders starting out today, when they look at what companies such as Microsoft are doing with the enormous distribution that they have, or even, for instance, a well-resourced startup like Evisort, it can be sometimes disheartening or even confusing to find that next idea that they can build that next big thing around. Do you have any such advice for founders in that boat, especially given you're also doing a lot of angel investing?
I think you just have to focus on what you can control. And I think to go back to my software point, just because there's a lot of AI technologies out there today that are readily available for design uses, it doesn't mean that it adds any value to actually solving business problems. In fact, I see a large gap. And so I have invested in companies where they just said, we're not going to solve the $10 billion problem at our inception. We're going to solve the $100 million problem, which is we're going to go and find 100 companies that pay us X, that if we can just do Y in terms of the business process they have today, whether it's in sales or marketing or developer or, with so many different examples, medical, patient forms, et cetera. Like, let me just own one thing and just do it really, really well. If you earn the customer trust to own that one thing, you would then have the budget, whether it's from your customer base or from future investors, to go and then build a platform around it. Right. So for me, like looking at the end platform of how do we take a company public is a false exercise, because that's not the first 10 years of a startup, right? What is that one thing, that one wedge you can do really, really well? And can you get 100 companies to use it as a starting basis? If you can, maybe it's worth doing.
I love what you said, Jerry. And for what it's worth, my philosophy is completely aligned with yours, especially since we do pre-seed investing. It makes no sense for founders at that stage to pitch to VCs, I think, with a big B billion in terms of, the business they are trying to build. There is so much that changes from that point over the next, who knows, a decade or plus in the course of the journey of that startup. All right. So we come to the very end of this podcast, Jerry, and I have a question for you to close this out. It has nothing to do with enterprises or startups. It is potentially a very cheesy question, but I can't seem to help myself. Given your background, being that you're a lawyer from no less than Harvard Law School, I thought I should ask you this. So the question is, do you see a future court trial that is entirely fought and judged by AI agents?
I think we're actually on the journey to that, but I don't think we'll fully automate it because of just the role that the judge or the jury has to play. But I do think so much of the litigation process could be automated. If anybody has been through a lawsuit or has supported going through a lawsuit, you'll realize that so much of that work is just paperwork back and forth, right? And dotting I's and crossing T's and filings. And so it's, I think a lot of it, a lot of it is automatable. Mm-hmm. And I do think in the future, whether it's a judge or a jury, they will be the customer to a lot of AI-assisted reasoning that's been done, right? I'll give one example. In the criminal area, right, sentencing guidelines are notoriously difficult to apply and notoriously an area that's challenged, an area that needs to be improved in our criminal justice system. And so, there are nonprofits out there that are working on how do we remove bias, but also apply the sentencing guidelines accurately to the facts that are at hand. That's something that even just 5 years ago, that's squarely within the jurisdiction of a judge. But today, a judge can use that tool to actually, if not anything else, sanity check the work that he or she's already doing. And I think there's just a lot of positive that could be, an output of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was such a fun and enlightening conversation, Jerry. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it being here.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on your favorite podcast platform so we can continue to help enterprise founders thrive.